Ooh, that is bright. Greetings. Good afternoon. I hope you've worked your way through your post-lunch stupor now. So we've got an interesting topic, and I'd like to start by, Jeff is fairly new to Deloitte. I'd like to ask him to say a bit about his new organization, which deals with technology, media, and telecommunications. What's the mission?
So the mission is to create within Deloitte a research organization that studies the telecommunications, technology, and media sectors to help understand what are the intersections between business and technology in those areas, and for us to understand them, to be able to write about them, and to help our clients and prospective clients understand what these trends are and what they should do, and also from a Deloitte perspective, to help to affect the different types of services and advice that we offer for our clients.
Great. Well, if this topic is indicative of the kinds of stuff you're going to be doing, it's going to be interesting. I think this is a very timely topic we've got today, and I'd like to kind of set it up with a little look back in history. A lot of you in here have gray hair like I do, and think about the information technology industry back in, say, the 70s. There were a bunch of incumbents, IBM, Univac, Burroughs, HP. We knew what the competitive environment was like back then. You produced good products. You had good customer service. You had a good sales force. You tried to lock in your customers, et cetera. I was at Sun Microsystems back in the late 80s, early 90s, when they were trying to disrupt some of the old guys, and that was still possible back then. I jumped over to Apple because I was intrigued by computing for the rest of us, trying to do things for consumers, which was still kind of novel back in those days. If you fast forward a quarter of a century, I guess, it seems like, yes, there still is an enterprise computing market out there, and some of you were involved in it, but it seems like the action has shifted towards the consumer. It's kind of a different world now. And when Jeff put the title of this together, I feel like I'm going in and out as I raise and lower my head. He titled it, "The Winner Takes All of Us." And it made me, as I was thinking about this, we're used to talking, winners take all, you take all the profits or all the market share or whatever. What does that mean in today's context? I mean, give us kind of the setup. You say the winners take all of us. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, let's talk about who's doing the taking. And we're talking about the tech giants. So without naming any specific companies, we're talking about the largest search companies and the largest social networks and chat platforms and the largest e-commerce companies and those that have big device ecosystems. So a handful of companies that have really high profits and literally, in Carl Sagan's terms, have billions and billions of customers. And so part of the all of us simply means that literally billions of us are their customers. And there's another area, though, where I think it's important to understand why they have so many of us. And this goes back to what Bill was talking about earlier with the business model of the network orchestrator. So when you think about the business models of these companies, you can call them platforms, you can call them network orchestrators, you could also call them multi-sided markets. And what they do is, by nature, they use network effects to add more value the bigger they get. So the more participants on a social network, the more people you can connect with. You want to connect with everyone that you know and everyone that you would like to know. And the businesses want to be able to connect with you too. And so there are multiple sides to these markets. They get bigger and more valuable as they get bigger. And of course, people end up finding them more valuable and spending more time on them. So there's a natural sense in which they get very big.
Do you think they've gotten too big?
Well, they have gotten very big. In terms of getting too big, we need to think about the other aspect in which they have all of us. And that is the degree in which we have invited these firms in to mediate our most really intimate and important relationships. Relationships with our family and our friends. things that nourish our souls, movies, art, music, things that nourish our bodies, food, clothing. And when you also think about home automation and home assistance, we have brought them into the hearth, literally, of our houses. And all the while, they're collecting a tremendous amount of data on us. So they have lots of us, they have lots of aspects of us, and they have a lot of our data.
You know, I think back to when Google launched and they said that our main mission is to do no evil. You, because you're still a working professional, you can't criticize any particular companies who might be customers, but I can. I'm retired. What do you think about what happened in the election? What do you think about how Facebook and Google enabled, these targeted ads that who knows may have flipped the election? Is that being evil, or maybe they weren't evil, but did they enable evil because of the power of their platforms? I mean, what's your take on that whole situation?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think no, they're not evil, and I don't think that they deliberately enabled evil. But what you end up seeing when you have so many different people in one area, and they're sharing information with one another, and then the organization, the social network or the search engine or what have you, has a lot of that information. Those companies, despite all the other things that they do, are largely advertising companies. And what they offer, the value they offer to their advertisers, is the ability to very specifically pinpoint the type of person that they want to have ads reach. So in my case, a 47-year-old guy with 2 kids who loves the Ohio State Buckeyes and likes to wear blue blazers, right? So if you're an advertiser, you can end up saying, well, I want to talk to someone just like that. And then there's an automated, essentially, auction where they can say, okay, sending an ad to that particular person who I know I want to talk to, I'm willing to do that for X amount of cents or dollars. Versus the way, let's say, college football or the NFL tries to send a message or an advertisement, which is to send me, 100, maybe 500 truck ads, and I know I'm never going to buy a truck, right? So that's not very efficient. The social network way of doing it is much more efficient. But when you think about how other actors, we've heard a lot about that recently at this conference, can use it, what if you want to influence an undecided female voter in Wisconsin? Are there particular messages, are there particular things that you would want to send that person? Now, I don't believe that any of these tech giants want that as an outcome, but the business model makes it easier for that type of interaction to occur.
I didn't know you were a Buckeye. I'm a Badger, so we can talk about the
We'll
game.
fight it out later on, won't we?
So if I think about this, you can see the good in getting targeted ads because these basically AI platforms know everything there is to know about you. But I can see the downside as well. And I'm wondering, as this moves forward, how do we balance the good and the bad in this kind of wonderful new world that we're in now?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what bigness means in all of this, right? We've already said that these platform-based organizations, this business model, really it gets very big. And I do think that this is century-level business model growth. It's exponential. So there's a certain aspect in which it's going to get big. One of the downsides to the tech giants in particular being big is that they are able to see, they almost have a God's eye view of the types of technology and business trends through their search engines, through who's on their cloud services and so forth. So they're able to see from a long way away trends that may be hidden to the rest of us. And they also have very big balance sheets. And so they are able to identify companies and potential threats very early on and to be able to acquire them. And so the tech giants, maybe the 5 biggest in the United States, just in the last 10 years, have made about 550 acquisitions of small firms. So that's a lot, and that's a way that you can kind of create market barriers to competition. But when you think about it from the consumer's point of view, have consumers really gotten a bad deal from this? Many of the services that they value the most are free. And even a lot of the innovations that some of these big companies have come out with are open source and available to everybody. So you think about white box networking. Was that going to come from the networking companies? Or telecommunications infrastructure and so forth, opening that up. Was that going to come from the tech industry? No. So there are things to kind of balance it out.
So if I'm an aging tech giant, I'm an IBM, I'm an HP, or a media company, I'm a New York Times, or an advertising company, how do I view this emergence of the new tech giants, and how do I compete with them? Can I?
Well, it depends on where you sit on that spectrum. So if you are an older tech giant, part of what you want to do is to move into the areas that are high growth and that may still be up for grabs right now, such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence. Now, obviously, the tech giants have got a huge advantage when it comes to artificial intelligence because they are able to recruit who they want. They have a tremendous amount of data, and they are really apt at using it in their internal operations. And we recently conducted a survey of 250 leading edge companies. And one of the biggest things we found when it came to whether they were benefiting or not benefiting from artificial intelligence was simply experience. Do you understand how it works? Can you train your data? Do you have access to data? So in that area, they're really expanding. And if you can move in that direction, that's one you'd want to. But take my industry, which is technology, media, and telecommunications. This is an industry where there's already a lot of consolidation, especially when you think about telecommunications firms and cable firms. Well, they are looking at this behemoth, at these behemoths, and saying, well, we need to get bigger fast. And so they're merging together very quickly. And regulators who would normally have said, well, forget it, you can't control that much of the market, are now saying, well, the competition you face is so difficult to beat that yes, we're going to allow it. And in fact, they're not just merging together, they're also bringing media so that they can start to compete with the way these firms are really intermediating the consumer and media itself.
You mentioned AI. There's been a lot of discussion about AI at this conference for good reason. I started my career as an AI researcher back in the 70s, so it's been fun to see this coming to fruition. But it's not lost on me that the biggest investments in AI are being done by these very companies who already have all this huge market power. So I guess it's the rich get richer, as it were. What about the startups? What about emerging companies? We talked about the battle between the giants. If I'm a startup now and I've got a good idea, is there room for me in this new world dominated by, you said 5, I'm trying to count who's the 5th one, but tech giants?
A few, we'll just call it a few.
Okay, a handful of tech giants are dominating the world. What does that mean for the startup ecosystem and for innovation, as we've been talking about?
Well, I know we shouldn't be using the word innovation, but I'll let it slip out a couple times.
Yeah, I'm in charge of the Ketchum Innovation Center, so I'm going to change the name now to something different. I don't know.
Well, one thing that is interesting and a little sobering at a conference like this, where we've been celebrating truly immense and world-shaking innovations, is that in some degrees, innovation and entrepreneurship, at least in the United States, are in trouble. There are fewer companies now that are less than a year old than there were in the 1970s. Since 2000, the share of startups in technology has gone down. And this is in the age of the unicorn and in the age of a lot of optimism. So we're already seeing some signs of this. And one other thing to consider is that if this were an age where all the great innovation we're seeing were really finding its way into the economy, you would not have something like nearly flat total factor productivity, which we've had in the last few years. That's an imprecise measure of innovation in an economy, but a very telling one when you think about how much higher it was in the mid-90s, how much higher it was in the 60s. So this is an innovative age, but my question is, are a lot of those innovative companies kind of dying on the vine as they're acquired, and they're never really, their technology and the talent never reaches its full potential?
Well, someone said, I think in one of the other sessions, about the acqui-hires that are happening. So the big guys can look at here's a group of 5 smart people doing something interesting, let's just get them right now and bring them in. And quite often the particular technology they're working on kind of dies on the vine inside the big company as they get repurposed or whatever. So it's a challenge out there. What about societal impact? I'm thinking back again to the old days. I don't remember thinking a whole lot about when I was at Sun, what was our impact on society going to be. But these companies are having a huge impact on society now. I mean, it's a very different world. Do they have this do no evil responsibility that they should be upholding? I mean, how do you see that playing out in terms of either positive or negative impacts on society?
Well, I think some of the impacts on society are ones where the tech giants themselves are going to have to probably get better at thinking about their business model and changing their business model so that it's not so easy for those who want to target particular populations to have nefarious motivations, right? So we can't have another 2, 3 US elections that are so easy to manipulate because you're basically using the same model to use fake news to target and influence somebody as you are to get someone to rethink whether they should use a new organic toothpaste, right? So that model, I think, is something that they're going to have to tweak. But when you think also at just what's happening within society, these algorithms that are being used to target us, to give us things we're interested in, are also creating, I think, a narrowing of our possibilities, the types of people we're willing to speak with, the ideas we're trying to countenance. And this is an idea I call algorithmic atomization, where we're getting closer and closer to an insular version of ourselves when these networks could also be used to broaden our horizons. So, if you were to think about, what a news feed might do to you, are you progressively becoming a narrower or perhaps less progressive person? And if so, what are the steps you as an individual need to take in order to work against some of these factors that are making you become a more concentrated but not a more well-rounded version of yourself?
So as we all get kind of pulled into the Borg, we need to think about what is the impact on us as individuals going to be going forward. I saw that Sheryl Sandberg was on the Hill yesterday behind closed doors. I would have loved to have been in that room to see how Sheryl charmed them and explained, that Facebook is not evil, but here's what we're going to do about it. I mean, I just think that Zuckerberg kind of woke up. I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle this, nefarious advertising challenge that popped up in the election. I don't think they quite realized just how much power they had, maybe, to affect things like elections. So, what should we, we talked a little bit about this, what should we as individuals, what should we as an industry be doing? Do we just go along for the ride and assume that, I'm going to buy everything from Amazon and I'm going to get all my news from Facebook and that's just the way it's going to be? Or, I mean, I'm trying to kind of tease out here, what could be done about all this stuff? I mean, there's good, there's bad, there's issues. What are the next steps?
Well, this is to not necessarily advocate any of these steps, but I think one of the things you're starting to see out there is an increasing wariness on the part of individuals and the government that these business models that have so quickly gotten so big that maybe they do have too much power, and that some of the foundations of them, including not being responsible for the content that were there originally to drive innovation, that maybe those things should be scaled back a little bit and more responsibility attributed to whoever is sending the news or the images and so forth. So that's one. I do think also that you're starting to see a lot more interest on the part, certainly, of European regulators and people in the US population to be able to have more control over their personal data, to understand who's using it, how it's being used, and so forth. And then you're starting to get some very interesting ideas about regulating these natural monopolies from things like utilities. So, there are models where utilities can be regulated, where you think about it, let's say a water utility. Everybody needs it. There are extremely high barriers to entry, and there are only going to be one or two. Well, there are models where you could say, well, if there were other market entrants, what would the fair price be? Or, can we end up setting a price, a profit price where, if we were to simulate an active market, what might that be? And so these are all different areas where, regulators could step in, individuals could step in. But one thing that I think is interesting about these platform companies, and that just gives us food for thought about how aggressive we want to be, is that people can always walk away and they can move to other platforms. The more tightly tied you are, the harder it ends up being. But new ones can emerge. They can lose their cachet. And I think that makes them a little bit different from the typical company.
I'm going to open this up in a second for questions, and in this case, maybe comments, because I suspect some of you have some ideas out there on this topic. I worry about regulation. I'm kind of a free market guy. I think back to breaking up of AT&T, and I think back to the attempts to break up Microsoft because of their power. Do you predict that governments, maybe in Europe in particular, are going to say, the time has come to break up Google? Well, I guess they broke themselves up. They're now Alphabet.
That's right.
So.
But take a Google. Let's say you split it into 15 different Googles, or in any company. If it's based on network effects, isn't it going to get big again very quickly? It will. And so this is an inherent part of that business model.
Yeah.
And so I think the challenge ends up being, if these are business models that we and multiple parts of an ecosystem find very valuable, is breaking it up the right thing, or are there other ways to mitigate what we would consider to be the negative effects of them?
I think we've got a couple of minutes, 4 minutes left according to my clock. Anybody have any comments or questions on this topic? What to do about the increasing power of the Amazons and Facebooks and Googles of the world? Yes. Tiptoes.
So one of the things I wonder about a lot is why we treat technology as being sui generis when it does something that we have already done without technology and does it better. Why is Facebook not a media company, even though it distributes and makes money from content? Why is Amazon not a retail business? Why do we say these things are completely different because they have technology involved? If we viewed them as being less in a technology industry standpoint and more, this is an industry we already have and regulate and have ethics and morals and viewpoints and traditions around, and you just have some extra levers in it, does that give us a different way of thinking about these things rather than saying, oh, it's technology, it must be utterly different because it has a computer?
I think that's a great comment, that this has all been swooshed together now. It used to be technology over here, media over there, advertising over there. What about that?
Well, in fact, they are all converging and they are all competing with one another. And I think part of what you're seeing, honestly, is the relaxation of regulation as, Congress in particular said, well, how are we going to compete? So you think about the concentration of telecommunications, the concentration of cable. Things that would never have been allowed to happen are now happening so that they can compete more effectively with these big firms. But in terms of industry-specific regulation, there's a really good point that, let's say, a fintech company, financial technology, does not end up having the same regulations as a bank because they don't have particular key parts of it, like deposits and so forth. And so the banks have long found this unfair, that someone could come in with like a robotic advisor software, but not have the same set of regulation that let's say, a bank would. And in fact, I think a lot of the technological startups have really engaged in almost regulatory arbitrage. You get the innovation out there, you see what happens, and then you fight your battles later.
Any other questions, comments out there? Yes.
I know it's a cliche at this point to say, if you don't pay for a service, you're the product. But I think we have to stop using this word free service. You're trading your identity.
Good point.
Right. And so they're an identity barterer or purchaser or whatever. The more we say it's free, we devalue our identity. And the more we can realize we're trading our identity, now we start to value it, and people say, wait a minute, you know, I don't necessarily want to do that, or I want some real value to my identity. So I just,
I think that's
you know,
a
when
great
I hear
point.
the word free, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Where's your sense of self-worth?
I would challenge that just a bit to think about how much of ourselves we are willing to trade for extremely minimal conveniences. How many of us have taken our fingerprint, gone like that on a phone because you didn't want to punch in 3 or 4 numbers? Soon, it's going to be, I don't want to punch in those 3 or 4 numbers, so I'm going to allow it to take a facsimile of my face. People are willing to do this over and over and over and over again. And what I've seen in 15 years of researching this is that people really are willing to give up what many would consider to be truly shocking amounts of privacy in order to have minor conveniences.
Well, you know, our time's up, but I would say, remember back in 2000 when we were joking about eyeball companies all trying to acquire eyeballs and no one knew how to make money off of it? Ha! Okay, we have a red light flashing in our face here, so I think we're done. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Good job.